We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
And what a policy! Yes, he would rather have the poor poorer, provided the rich were less rich.
We will never forget them, nor the last time we saw them, this morning, as they prepared for their journey and waved goodbye, and slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God.
I say a policy of peace is free trade, stay out of their internal business, don't get involved in these wars, bring our troops home.
Hello and welcome to the first episode of The Audit, a program that aims to explore engaging ideas, leaving no stone unturned. Today we are discussing 9/11 and the resulting conspiracy movement that has emerged from this tragic event. It is considered by many to be the biggest conspiracy movement in history, with public fascination surpassing even that of the JFK assassination, as it continues to command larger membership numbers and celebrity support than any counter-knowledge initiative the world has seen. The 9/11 conspiracy contends, in general terms, that the terrorist actions carried out on 9/11 were not the result of an Al-Qaeda-led attack, at least not singularly. Rather, it was the result of an inside job, spearheaded by the idea that a controlled demolition brought down the World Trade Center Twin Towers, and not the impact of the jetliners and the ensuing fire. Today we are joined by Daniel O'Toole, who is an unabashed 9/11 conspiracy skeptic, and he has kindly joined me today to discuss this highly controversial issue. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Mate, before we get into the 9/11 conspiracy debate, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about your background and what association you've had with this topic prior to today.
Well, I've obviously read about it a little bit just out of personal interest, but I've also had a fairly rich history in terms of the study of international conflict and international relations. I hold a Bachelor of International Studies from UNSW and also a Master of Strategy and Defence from the Australian National University. So I have some background in terms of just dealing with theories of strategic thought, international conflict and conflict movement.
Okay, well, let's get straight into it then. As I mentioned in the introduction, that this movement has almost gone, I guess, beyond the notion of a splinter belief. I mean, many international opinion polls report even larger percentages now believing in this conspiracy than immediately after the attack. I guess, why do you think this notion of conspiracy has captivated the world's attention over any other counter-belief?
Well, I mean, I actually didn't know that it had gone to quite that extent, but I personally tend to think that a lot of this, the notion of conspiracy theories, the idea that there's some massive plan behind things. I mean, in a funny sort of way, I think it's similar to the appeal of religion. It's this idea that there is a massive plan behind everything, that actually the world isn't that chaotic, and that there's a lot more control than we can actually perceive. And I think that in a funny sort of way, while people become quite irate about it, it also delivers a level of comfort and I think a sense of security to people to think that actually there is something behind the curtains calling the shots.
I think a lot of people might have their minds boggled, I guess, at the concept of people feeling more secure in knowing we live in a world where, for instance, in this case, the United States might have inflicted an attack on itself. But what you're saying basically is that this could be something that has arrived out of a basic human tendency to crave control?
Yeah, no, I tend to think that, when you look at something like this, you can, we'll probably go into later on, and I'll give my views on it. When you look at it in terms of a big picture perspective, there are all kinds of problems with these conspiracy theories. You probably find interviews online and all the rest of it when you look at debunker movements, and they'll have engineers give their own specialist opinions as to why a lot of the theories about the way the towers fell and all that and actually don't really stack up. But just in terms of the wider context, these things don't really fit. But people still like to believe them because, first of all, it's a sort of strange dichotomy, I think, where people hate the government and are really suspicious of the government. But at the same time, I think on some level, the idea that there's nothing out there and nothing controlling anything, and that this all just might be a massive free-for-all in which anyone could drop dead at any moment is actually is more terrifying than thinking that there is some monolithic enemy that we can all focus our attention on that's controlling everything. And I think that's there's a strong connection there with that.
Yeah, and would you say that, before we actually said delve specifically into 9/11, that would go for any notion of conspiracy theory. Do you think that that's born out of that need as well?
Well, I mean, I think that it's difficult to sort of categorically state that. I feel that in this particular instance, but I mean, I do think that there are reasons to be suspicious of motives of government. I do think that governments do things, and not just governments, any major political organisation or any major, I think, body with undue sway or influence. I mean, I think News Corp is a good example of a group that's probably healthy to have a bit of suspicion of. I think that there is a basis for suspicion, but I think that there gets to a point where that suspicion just becomes unreasonable and irrational.
So you do feel, at least to some degree, there is a reason for whether it be governments or corporate enterprises to be a bit duplicitous in what they present to the public. So I guess in a sense, it's not completely without foundation that people would believe the government might be behind certain conspiracy theories.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, I think that that's true. I think that it does. I think it's healthy to be suspicious of any massive body with a lot of power. I mean, it's that old saying, like power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So you have to be suspicious of any powerful group. But as I said, there gets to a point where that suspicion can become almost maniacal, like and unreasonable. Like, I mean, trying to I think put some of these conspiracies into a wider context. I think it's just clutching at straws, and I think that after a while it becomes its own sort of faith.
Yeah, fair enough. And look, I'm sure, especially I guess with the advent of the information revolution on the internet, these kind of ideas can run away with themselves, and they are sort of at the mercy of the minute contributions of millions of people. So a movement can get started like that. I mean, it can be a positive, constructive thing, I think, but it can also get a little bit out of hand. So. Or irrational, as you said. I guess getting back to 9/11 specifically, now, I guess I kind of know the answer to this, I think, but we'll start at 5,000 feet. Do you believe that Al-Qaeda is responsible for the 9/11 attacks?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I believe they're responsible.
Okay, so I guess in so far then, as you agree, would you accept, I guess, in its entirety, the findings of the 9/11 Commission with regard to the events of terrorism that transpired that day, or are there any anomalies?
Well, it's been a while. I actually did read that now, but it was quite a few years ago. But I remember finding it quite satisfying at the time. So I accepted the findings. I remember the major thing to come out of the 9/11 Commission was the problems with the intelligence agencies themselves. And, I found like all of that actually really resonated. And that's, I'll talk about that a bit later, but I think that's the key thing more than anything else. I mean, we can talk about like, problems with engineering and all the rest of it later, but I think it was quite satisfying.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, look, I guess we'll start off with a group I'm sure you're familiar with, the 9/11 Truth Movement. Now, they claim that the motivation for an inside job lies heavily in the idea that governments, after an attack of this nature, are able to, I guess, exert a greater amount of control and also help to more easily manufacture consent among the public to help expand, for instance, I don't know, ideologically or geopolitically, etc. Do you firstly agree with that statement? And secondly, do you think that the Bush administration was able to take advantage of 9/11 to help service its own agendas?
Oh, no, absolutely I do. I think that governments definitely use, outside threats as a way of unifying their populations. And I think that the US and particularly major military powers have been doing that for a very long time. I think the Chinese do that at the moment, on a number of fronts. There's a whole other, the whole massive history we could talk about for all kinds of countries and how they do that. And I think that they really did capitalize on 9/11 in terms of the sense of solidarity it created and all the rest of it. But whether or not, it's that old saying, whether, like correlation is not the same thing as causation, I don't actually think that while they did capitalize on this, I don't actually think that it's something that they engineered so they could get into Iraq. I mean, if you even looking at it, you'd have to think that the amount of controversy just like 2 years after they'd experienced the attack, they went into Iraq, and already at that point there was massive international, I think, criticism of the United States for drawing this very clearly false link between Saddam Hussein and Al Qaeda. I mean, you know, it was just so badly done. I think that